Okay, so in the last video, we talked about the purpose of HTML. In this video, I would like to talk about what is accessibility. I hinted that it is a vast topic. So in this video, I will go through the entire process of it, basically in theory, not in practice. So let's go with what is accessibility and let's kind of like zoom it out. We are talking about basically digital accessibility here, which is nothing but making site or app accessible to disabled people. And that's about it. That's all we are concerned about when we are talking about the accessibility here. Now, the one who implements this accessibility in any site or app is a developer who will charge a cost to the business for implementing this. This generates a problem for the businesses. Basically, the problem for businesses when it comes to implementing accessibility are can be explained in following points. 1. Accessibility is implemented by a developer. Developer don't work for free. Access time is required to implement this feature. 4. Maybe I should just zoom it out. Time is required to implement this feature. Businesses are required to pay the developer for their time. And finally, the more the time, the more the time, the more the cost for the business. So fundamentally, there is a problem here for any business to implement this accessibility part because it will cost them money. And for businesses, there is no reason for them to waste money if it is not getting anything of revenue or profit in return for them. They are not charity, they will not do it, right? So in a sense, the reason why I just put this point of business in the very beginning is because accessibility contains three sort of entities. What are those? Well, the first entity will be individual. The second entity will be business. And finally, the third entity will be legal. When we talk about individuals in terms of accessibility, this is the part and parcel of the people for which a developer will implement any sort of features in terms of accessibility, right? As a developer, you don't have to be concerned about what business do or what the legal ramification of not implementing an accessibility is in your so-called country. That is for the business to take care of. As a developer, you have to just implement the feature for this individual if your business gives you incentive to do so. Okay, or if you have time within the deadline, then yes, you can actually do that as well. So let's go to these one by one and see what these are, right? When it comes to individual, we are basically talking about a person who has some sort of problems in these domains. Let me just write them down. Visual. So that will be first. Then it will be mobility. That is the second domain in which we are talking about. The third domain will be cognitive. Fourth domain will be in terms of hearing. And that's about it. Now, in terms of visual, what are the problems that we are talking about? We're talking about problems like blindness, complete blindness, or partial blindness. These could be because of some sort of like disease, like say a person has diabetes and he has developed glaucoma. So that leads to black spots in a corner of the eye, and that is sort of like a partial blindness, and etc. Okay. So what are the solutions if you have to tackle some sort of like accessibility for a person who has visual impairments? Well, the solutions are basically fix the contrast ratio, right? Contrast ratio is a standardized solution for one of the standardized solution in web to actually take care of visual problems. So basically, if you look at this particular background, it's black, and we are writing the text in white. So the black and white contrast ratio is quite good. This is the example of when I say fix the contrast ratio of your so-called site or app. So do not use, say, white background and then light color of text. Second is going to be visual hierarchy. In a way, keep properly sized headings. These could be attained by these structures that we have, or elements like h1, h2, h3 in HTML itself. Now, think about it like this. This is large, this is also large, and this is kind of like a medium. Okay. We can say if this is extra large, then there is a proper visual hierarchy here, which is properly sized headings. This contains this contains this. Okay. So we can actually see what is happening. If I make it like so, and if I make it small, everything is like just crap. Let's be honest. Okay. That's what we are talking about here when we say visual. Now, also one more thing, just to be quite honest here, this sort of font is not quite accessible maybe for most people, but if I change this to say this font, this is not something that I like, right? So basically when we talk about accessibility, it's, yes, there is a standard, but there's also subjectivity involved based on the subject that you are dealing with. Okay. Images with alt. Thing is, this is where the CEO people from the marketing department will come to you and tell you ki in the image attribute, in the alt, put the keywords, not the do not care about all this accessibility thing. Put the keywords here because we want our images to be ranked properly on in the Google. The thing is, I would say always choose accessibility over SEO when it comes to image alt attribute. Why? Because SEO is already being taken care of in so many places in your website. Why mess up the accessibility area for just small improvement in terms of SEO? I don't know. That is something that within the that has to be decided on a team or project basis. Okay. Then you have something called array attributes, which is good for accessibility. There are a lot of things which actually supports the visual accessibility as well. Then we have something called we can say etc. There are a bunch of things that you can actually do in visual solution depending on who your subject is, right? There is something called WCAG standards. You can look into it. There I can just mention it right here. There you will find a lot of suggestions which will help you do some sort of standard practice in accessibility department. Okay. The rest is something which is completely subjective based on the user that you have for your app. Then we move on to mobility part of, which is also one of the things that an individual has sort of like a problem an individual has. So imagine somebody has an accident and they lost their hand or for temporary or permanent time period, right? So that's one of the reason why mobility will be an issue for them. Diseases like Parkinson's will be an issue that could create an issue for them. Then there is multiple sclerosis and etc., which in any ways will hamper the way a user or a person will interact with your site, right? For instance, if we take the example of a very extreme example of Stephen Hawking, he had mobility issues, right? So the way he interacted was through eye movements, right? And there was a device that was built for him to do so. So that is like taking care of a person who has such extreme level of mobility problem. Still, the world became accessible to him through technology, right? So we are just talking about as an extreme example, but each and every you can say app requires some sort of thinking. What is the degree to which you want to involve a person who is suffering from one of these so-called problems? Okay, now the standard solutions here are basically keyboard shortcuts, then there's a keyboard navigation, voice command here as well, and then we can say etc. Then let's come to this called cognitive. So in cognitive, you have problems like ADHD, you have autism spectrum disorder, you have dyslexia. So if you have watched this movie called Tare Zameen Par, I think the kid in that movie had this problem of dyslexia, where a complicated word started jumbling in his head, right? So that sort of problems. And yeah, there's also one extreme here, which is seizures, right? So just putting it out here, solutions for this cognitive thing is basically have simple and plain languages, right? Rather than complex language, have a simple and plain language. Try to minimize, try to give option for minimizing or stopping animations. Okay, then we will have clear headings should be present there. Similarly, we can have like complex information is a no-no. Complex information should be simplified as much as possible. Okay, so basically all the copy editing should be as simple and straightforward yet effective as possible. Fourth category of issues in which the individual fall when it comes to accessibility problem is the hearing category, where we have people who are deaf, who are partially deaf, right, or partial hearing loss, etc. So if you have watched this anime movie, or if you have read this manga, I think the name was Silent Voice. It's a great movie. You should watch it. The girl in that movie actually suffered from partial deafness, right? So that is what we are talking about, something in that degree, or something I mean, as you can see, pretty much everything here in this whole thing has sort of like a degree from very minimal to very extreme, right? That's what makes it subjective in a way. So in terms of hearing, we will have solutions. If we have, say, videos, there should be subtitles in videos, more images and diagrams, and finally text information is more suitable for them. Okay, and these are the standard solutions that we can build in our app or in our site by default when we are building it, so that there is some sort of head start for these people, and the rest of the thing has to be done in sync with them in terms of user feedback, and constant improvement of the site is a process in accessibility, which is why accessibility is basically a very time consuming issue or time consuming problem statement, which is also why the businesses try to avoid it. So we come to the part, why should business even do that, right? Why should businesses on something like this in the first place? Like I said in the beginning, businesses are not charities. So they will not be doing anything for the sake of humans, right? Unless it provides them some sort of profit or revenue. So is there any sort of reason for businesses to implement accessibility then? Well, yes. You see, businesses by their own accord will do this if only they have incentive of generating revenue. Okay, I think this should be enough. Okay, revenue. So revenue impact is there for businesses if they do not have accessibility. If they do not have accessibility. So imagine in a very basic scenario that a business creates a music app. Okay, by default that alienates all the people who suffer from hearing loss. Okay, that means that chunk of revenue market is gone for this particular business. So what can they do is then somehow actually incorporate it or let them go. Now imagine this, assume that this chunk of market, in our example it's, let's say, hearing loss people, right, is equal to $490 billion, billion dollars, then that means that is the amount of market loss in terms of opportunity cost a business is taking. In reality, this amount is actually equivalent to all the people who belong in the PWD community in US. So this figure is basically all the people who fall in PWD category in US. Basically people who are in some way falling in any of the above defined categories, they together make a market of $490 billion in US alone. Therefore, if you zoom out from the US, you will find that the world is filled with maybe $1 trillion worth of market for who contained people who fall in either of the four categories. So if as a business you are not creating a music app and you're creating a simple website and you're not making that website accessible, say if you're at Amazon and you are not making your website accessible, the chances are you're losing $1 trillion worth of market. Is that something that is like, I hope that is quite understandable, right? So this gives a business kind of like a reason to make their app or their site accessible. Okay. The second reason why a business will do that, even if there's no such thing as profit, is because if there is a legal ramification because of the jurisdiction in which it is operating. So that means if you are in any sort of like any working democracy which values human rights, you will find that discrimination based on disabilities is a crime. So outward, you cannot do that, right? Now the problem is how long or what is the stretch to which this particular law applies in your so-called country. And there might be countries where this also applies in digital space as well. So that means that if you are in this particular jurisdiction and you do not have an accessible website which passes certain standards, then you are liable for some sort of fine or some sort of criminal proceeding against you as a business. Okay, so that kind of like forces the business, if they fall in that jurisdiction, to actually implement it. So what they actually do, they actually set up their legal entities in places where that is not the case, and then they can actually say, ki, oh, we are not the part and parcel of your jurisdiction in the first place, so we cannot do anything. And you cannot actually punish the individual who is implementing it, because it becomes key. You cannot punish individual because of their lack of skill anyways, right? They can always say ki, it's a lack of skill, there's not much that we can do, and we will do better, and blah blah blah. So this part is basically based on jurisdiction. Okay, in short, this is the whole accessibility in a very brief theory part that you can take with you, that it is a digital accessibility. When we talk about in web space, what is accessibility? It is for the digital accessibility that we are talking about, making a site and app accessible to the disabled people. There's a business perspective involved here, because there's no way a business will do anything unless it generates some sort of like revenue, or has some sort of like profit, or it is impacting revenue. As a developer, you are only concerned with this individual area, because this is all you can do, all you can control. The business will be incentivized by either the impact on revenue or profit to instruct its developer to implement the accessibility in their app or in their site for an individual, right? First is either revenue impact or the profit impact. The second reason why a business could be incentivized to actually implement the accessibility is because there is a legal ramification if they do not do so. And that's about it. So that's why accessibility has three entities, which is individual, which is business, and which is legal. And as a developer, you only have to go deep into this part. You can let go of what the business is doing, what the legal part is. It's not your problem. You should not be worried about it. What you should be worried about is at least implementing the standard practices when it comes to accessibility, so that you can have some sort of head start already. And that's it. Thank you for watching. And if you like this, please just subscribe the video.